Hey there, it's Graham McConnell again with My Canadian Adventures, the best channel for the coolest people, places, and things in Canada. This week we're interviewing Rob Armstrong. He's a professional Canadian comic book artist, and we'll ask him what it's like to be an artist in Canada.
I always loved comic books whenever I was a kid going up to the cottage with my folks. We would stop at the convenience store on the way up, and right underneath all the dirty adult magazines was a whole row of comic books, and a lot of them were like X-Men, Spider-Man, a lot of the mainstream stuff by the bigger artists. And I remember getting into it just as artists were starting to make a name for themselves in the industry, where writing was just as important as the artwork, and I was blown away by some of it. Never thought until years and years later that it would be a valid job. I thought it was one of those things like, yeah, okay, I could be a movie star, sure. But then you find out that there are ways into the industry, and if you work hard enough at something, it eventually comes to you. Put the paper right on top of the page, trace, trace, trace. You do that for 3 or 4 years, all of a sudden you don't have to put the paper on top of the page, you can put it beside the page. And you can look at the page and draw what's there. And then 3 or 4 years after that, well, I don't even need that anymore. I've drawn that so many times that I can just do it from memory. I know how to do this stuff. Then you start breaking down anatomy. Then you start breaking down light sources. Then you start breaking down perspective. Then you start breaking down storytelling, how to lead the reader's eye around the page. All the tricks in the actual trade. I was never the best artist. I had at least 4 or 5 people around me all the time who were better artists than I was. Better at drawing, better at perspective, better at shading, better at all the fundamentals. But they all treated it as a short-term hobby and lost interest, whereas I kept drawing my whole life. X-Men were huge when I was a kid. Very influential. I remember just because when I was getting in, really getting into comic books at the beginning of high school, that's when guys like Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri were really blowing up. And the difference between them and just the old school, I was never really into the old school Jack Kirby style of illustrating. I liked these new guys that were coming up because it was exciting. The way they were drawing panels, the way they were laying it out, the way the camera angles they were choosing, it was so dramatic and exciting, and I ate it up. I ate it up and blew all of my allowance on it. I didn't learn what I needed to know about anatomy in high school. I didn't learn what I needed to know about, again, like light sources, perspective, all of these advanced drawing techniques that I learned in university. You could learn that from a college, and like I said, there's a million YouTube videos out now that you could watch and learn about any of that stuff. You don't need a university other than accreditation today. When I first broke into the business, it's funny, I had to go all the way to San Diego to meet a company that was operating out of Markham. And I had always wanted to be a penciler, and I was told by a DC editor that I should try inking because my attention to detail was great, but my actual finishes weren't all that great. And these guys were looking for an inker, and I was looking for any way in the industry, and it was right when I was finishing my university career, so I was looking for full-time work. And they got me started in-house helping right away on their book for Dreamwave called Warlands. And then they made me the full-time inker on one of their main books called Dark Minds. And then I helped with Neon Cyber. And then as the company grew, that's where they ended up getting a marketing manager and started making headway into Hasbro, where they secured the license for Transformers, G.I. Joe. We had Mega Man, Devil May Cry, Killzone. There was a bunch of different, and once Transformers exploded for the company and really took off, and all of a sudden Hollywood producers were calling saying, we want the rights to this comic, that's when we could sort of pick and choose what licenses we wanted to work on. Once we got the Transformers license, we were the #1 comic book publisher in North America for 6 months. So we sold more comics than Marvel, we sold more comics than DC. Not altogether, but #1 issues, like our Transformers book was #1 for 6 months. When he asked me to do a pinup of RC, I took it literally and did a pinup pose of RC, which turned out to be so popular that they turned it into a statue. And then there was a 12-inch statue, which I still haven't been able to track down for under $2,000. One day I will own it. And then there was a whole bunch of smaller statues. So I do have the smaller statue, and I will display it with the larger poster once I get my studio set up down here. And people just assumed that Pat did the artwork for it, but if you actually look at the lithograph, it's printed right on the side that the artwork is by me, and that the colors are by Pat, and the backgrounds are by Ed.
Stop! Wait a minute. Something else I wanted to bring up. Every year in Barrie, the Rotary Club of Barrie has the Great Canadian Beaver Festival. About 6 years ago or so, they had these big fiberglass beavers. They stand about 3 foot tall. And they called out for local artists to design and paint a beaver for them so they can display them at the festival. Well, Rob and I submitted a treatment for a Transformer beaver. We called it Bumble Beaver. And they accepted it. So he did the design and I did the painting. I think it turned out awesome. I still go down every September to visit it at the lakeshore.
I personally, especially driving up north, had never seen a comic book take place in Northern Ontario. I would drive at night and it would be absolute blackness. And I've always loved horror movies and horror comics. And I thought, why the hell hasn't anybody created anything that takes place here? It's the perfect environment. You could wipe out an entire small town. And in my mind already, I was thinking about like a wave of rabid werewolves washing over this town, ripping people apart, turning people into more werewolves overnight, in one night. And nobody would know about it for the longest time afterwards. But I think there's some good to it because you're sort of unique in Canada. There's not very many of us. It's a much smaller population. So if you have something that's interesting or good, it's easier to stick out. I think the opportunity to get published is bigger in the States because you have the opportunity to go to more conventions and to meet more editors, and that's really how you get into the business now. You can't just send people emails and expect them to hire you. You have to make a name for yourself or ingratiate yourself with those editors. So I think being in Canada was a little more difficult for me to find, a publisher that would be interested. But again, for my own thing, Kickstarter is universal, right? It breaks borders. I'm sort of a passive artist when it comes to commerce. I do stuff for myself and what makes me happy and finds a niche and an audience insofar as just to pay for me to continue to do it. So I'm happy to do it, to continue to do it, but I'm not going to go out and ask for an interview with somebody. I'm not going to show somebody my portfolio to try to get work. If someone comes to me, I'm open for commission. I'm always open for commissions. But I will definitely give you the advice which has been most recently given to me, which is if you want to be a comic book artist, do your own thing. Marvel will find you. DC will find you. If you approach them, you'll get lost in the noise. And DC and Marvel editors will tell you the same thing. Image editors will tell you the same thing. Do your own thing online. Do a webcomic online. If you have 10,000 followers, you will get contacted by Marvel or DC. My website is www.groovydead.com, and the email is all through there, groovydead1 or groovydeadmail. I'm also groovydead1 on Instagram, and groovydead, I think it's just groovydead on Twitter. Yeah.
So that's it for this week. Don't forget to get out there and support Canadian artists and Canadian talent. And until next week, get out there, have fun, and have your Canadian adventure.